Hello everybody, welcome to this new chapter of the agroecology lecture. Today we will talk about fertilization. So today we will talk about three main ways to fertilize your crops. First, organic fertilization. We'll talk about ruminant manure, chicken manure and biochar. We will then talk about mineral fertilization, so synthetic and mineral fertilizers and urine. And then we will talk about so-called green manure, so fertilization by plants, seeing the difference between the grain legumes, the legumes as green manure, the grasses as green manure, and the use of leguminous trees as green manures. First of all, just a quick reminder who will be really important for this chapter is the CN ratio. So if you have a high CN ratio, you have a high concentration of carbon and low nitrogen, so above 20 of the CN ratio. This means that if you use a fertilizer with this uh, ratio of carbon and nitrogen, you might provoke a nitrogen starvation. So the microorganism will fix nitrogen and it will not be available for the plant. And this will lead that the plant will not grow well because of lack of nitrogen. And if you have a low CN ratio, a lot of nitrogen and little carbon, so for instance at the 15 or on the 10, you will have this so-called priming effect. So you will give a lot of nitrogen for the microorganisms, but not much carbon, so they will use the carbon from the soil, and that way you will have an accelerated mineralization, a loss of organic matter, and a loss of fertility. Which is why in a fertilizer, ideally you would have a CN ratio between 15 and 20 in order to cover the need of nitrogen of the crops. And in order to also feed the soil with carbon and maintain its fertility. So as I said, first we'll talk about manure, so ruminant manure of cows, sheep and goats. It's an excellent fertilizer. It contains all nutrients in a balanced way adapted to the crops, and it contains a lot of organic matter, so it's interesting to maintain soil fertility. In order to keep its quality, you should store it in a concrete pit protected from the rain. You should cover it in order that first the rain does not come in, and also the contact with the air is as low as possible to prevent high decomposition. You still need some air, otherwise you will get anaerobic condition and you will get fermentation. So this is not what we want, but you should limit the air coming in order to slow down the decomposition and thus the loss of carbon and also the volatilization of nitrogen. In order to have good manure, you need to have healthy animals that you feed with good fodder. It's important to keep the animals in a pen in order to collect manure, firstly in the night, but if possible also in the day. You should, when you apply the manure, you should try to incorporate in the soil to limit the contact with the air, to limit the loss of nitrogen and carbon. And the CN ratio of ruminant manure is of 30 if you use fresh manure with straw, of 20 if you use fresh manure without straw. So this is approximation. And the decomposed manure that you composted could get down to 10. Then you can use chicken manure. It's interesting because you have a high quantity of basic cation, potassium, calcium, magnesium. So it's really an interesting fertilizer also to reduce soil acidity. Usually you have a really fast decomposition and high concentration of nutrients. So especially in the tropic where the decomposition is fast, you can use it similarly to a mineral fertilizer. So at a specific moment, at a specific place, you can use it to get an effect on the crop. But it still contains organic matter, so it's interesting for soil fertility. You should take the same measure as cattle manure to store it, and it can have a CN ratio around 10. You should be careful because it have a high concentration of basic cations, and this can cause a destabilization of the soil and erosion if you add too much. So you should not exceed 10 tons of hectare of per hectare of chicken manure. So if you want to add more, you should mix it with ruminant manure or other fertilizers. Then you have composting, so you can compost different things. Here we will just talk about vegetable waste composting. So you should always have it on the ground in order to have the insects and microorganisms get in the compost to decompose your wastes. Um, okay, then you make a kind of sandwich. You do different layer. First you add straw, then you can put 10 centimeter of kitchen waste, so peels and things like that, rotten foods, and then 20 centimeter of straw leafy waste. And then you water, and then you repeat these layers until you get to the top, and then you should finish with straw. You should water then you compost regularly, and every 10 days you should turn the pile, and then it can be ready when it is black and looks like so. It can take 1 to 3 months, and you usually get a CN ratio at the end of 15. But this is a bit an average, but it's really depend on what you bring and if you on how much uh, if you bring a lot of straw, you will get a higher sin ratio. If you got bring a lot of kitchen waste, you will get the low sin ratio, of course. And of course, if you want to compost your manure, you can use the same principle as we talked here, but you use manure instead of kitchen waste. This is example of a, um, a bin you could build to. So it should be in the ground. It should be elevated. Another type of organic fertilizer that you can produce is biochar. So it's basically pyrolyzed organic material. What's it mean? It's organic material, wood, straw, anything that was burned at high temperature with uh, almost no oxygen. So you get charcoal. It's basically charcoal from organic origin. Um, it has a lot of qualities. It's really interesting to improve the quality of the soil because you bring a carbon that is almost inalterable, so it will stay in the soil for really a long time. It should not be degraded or decomposed. So it will work like a sponge. It will retain a lot of water and nutrients and then release it when the plants need them. On the opposite, it will also prevent water stagnation because it can absorb a lot of uh, water. So it's useful in dry areas because it holds the water that the plants can take, and it's interesting in stagnating area because it can take up a lot of water and prevent and distill air in the soil. You can apply between 5 and 50 ton an hectare, and you don't need to reapply because it usually stays in the soil. It doesn't bring any nutrients, so you should mix it with manure or compost if you want to add the nutrients. And you can create it out of waste product, corn stalks, nutshells, branches, coffee husk, etc. Okay, so this was it for the conventional organic fertilizer, and I will just talk about mineral fertilizer. So usually when we talk about mineral fertilizer, we talk about a synthetic fertilizer from the industry. So what basically mineral fertilizer means it's a fertilizer that only contains nutrient in mineral form, so you don't have organic matter in it. It's interesting because the nutrients are then in this case soluble and can be taken by the plant directly. So it allows a quick and efficient effect on growth and yield. So this is really interesting to add nitrogen and phosphate to really improve the yield of certain crops. And potassium fertilizer is mostly important for vegetables and for tubers like potatoes and yam. But there's a few issues linked to this use. This is why in organic agriculture you don't use these and you use only organic fertilizer. First of all, is energy consuming and polluting. So this is the case for nitrogen fertilizer. As you know, nitrogen fertilizer are produced by the Haber-Bosch process, which fix nitrogen from the atmosphere uh, um, in soluble form, and this process use a lot of energy. So 1 to 2 liters of gasoline to produce 1 kilogram of nitrogen, and almost 9 kilograms of CO2 is produced to produce 1 kilogram of nitrogen. So first of all, you have this problem that it uses a lot of energy to produce nitrogen. This is of course only for nitrogen, because phosphorus is a mined nutrient, so you still need energy to mine it, but it's not as high as for nitrogen production. A second problem is more in your soil, is about soil fertility. Is the priming effect that we already talked about. So if you bring this mineral fertilizer, you will feed your plant, but you will also feed all the microorganisms in the soil. And then as you feed them and you don't bring carbon, they also need to take carbon, so they will take it from the soil, and you will lose all organic matter, which means you will lose soil fertility. And then to get yield, you will need to fertilize more, and then you will lose more soil organic matter because you fertilize more with mineral fertilizer, so you get into a vicious circle. So this is the second issue linked to mineral fertilization. And the third issue is they are really soluble molecules, so there is a high risk of leaching. First of all, it can be useless. If you apply a soluble fertilizer that can wash by the rain, you don't get any result and you lose money. This is the first thing. And secondly, then the nutrients goes in the water and can pollute these waters. Another issue is for phosphorus, it can be fixed by the soil. As you know, the phosphorus fixation, and this will just mean that your input of fertilizer, which is really costly, was useless. And of course, the fourth problem with mineral fertilizer is that they are really costly. And for all this reason, and particularly in the tropics where rainfall is intensive and soil are likely to fix phosphorus, it is essential to use mineral fertilizer in combination with an organic input. If you want to maintain your soil fertility and not get problems in the long term, you should really add also organic fertilizer and not only mineral fertilizer, even if you don't practice organic farming. So these are a few tips. As I said, always apply the mineral fertilizer with an organic fertilizer, so not at the same time, but on the same crop. You should always add some organic matter, especially if you add some mineral fertilizer. You shouldn't apply the fertilizer on exposed soil in order to prevent the leaching. You shouldn't apply, if possible, during the heavy rain, where otherwise you will all the fertilizer will get leached. And you should prefer for nitrogen urea to nitrate and ammonium, because nitrate is very soluble, so you have a high risk of leaching, and ammonium has a high risk of N volatilization, especially if it's in contact with the air. And ammonium is acidic and will cause will acidify your soil, which is often already a problem in the tropics. Okay, these are a few tips if you want to use mineral fertilizer. But of course, if you practice organic farming, you are not allowed to use them. Then we'll talk about another mineral fertilizer, which is not synthetic, but is mineral because you don't have any organic matter in it, is the urine of all animals. But in this case, we'll talk about the human urine, because the animal urine you usually have in the manure. So this is just to say that you have 80% of the nitrogen and 50% of the phosphorus that human secrete is found in the urine. It also contains a lot of minerals like calcium, potassium, iron, magnesium, copper, zinc. So if you can recycle these nutrients, you will have a strong potential to replace a synthetic fertilizer and to have a good source of nutrients for your crops. And because also you will get the nutrients in a soluble form, so you will really have the nutrients ready to be used like a mineral fertilizer. But still, it's still a mineral fertilizer, so you will not bring organic matter. You can cause a priming effect, so you should of course use it in combination with an organic fertilizer like a normal synthetic fertilizer. Of course, these raise issues of culture and hygiene. I will not talk about the culture issue. Everybody in each region can discuss it, or is it something that can be possible, and how? It depends on the countries and the region. Just talk here about the scientific information that we have on this. So about the hygiene, what we need to know if we want to use urine is that the urine of a healthy person is sterile. There's no pathogen in it. They are all fine in the feces. So if you can separate the urine from the feces, you get a hygienic product that cannot contaminate you or your crops or anything. So you should have urine that did not come in contact with stool, and you should have urine from people who are not ill or who are not taking medication. And as a precaution, you should store urine for 3 months before using it. How can you collect it? As I said, you have to separate it from feces, so there are a few possibilities. Some institution developed this toilet that separate the urine from the rest, so and then you can just collect it. So this is an example of a toilet that can be quite easily built, or you can just really have a basic system to collect it. And then how to apply it? You can mix it to the menu. You can just put it on your menu heap and then mix it. You can use it to water your crops if it's not too concentrated. Um, and you can use it as a target fertilization in space and time. So you can you apply it regularly to feed your crop, or you can apply it with more concentration at the moment you want, for example, at flowering or at hearing. You shouldn't wet the leaves in urine, otherwise you can burn them. It's good to use them for crops that demand a lot of phosphorus, like cereals and legumes, and you can apply between 1 cubic to 5 cubic an hectare. Okay, so that was it about the mineral fertilization. Now we will talk about fertilization by plants, so-called green manure. So the idea of green manure is to grow crop to maintain and improve soil fertility. So to do this, you can grow two type of crop. You can grow legumes, which you know will fix nitrogen from the atmosphere, and then you will get an input of nitrogen in your system. Or you can use other crops and legume included in them that will mobilize nutrients from the soil and assimilate them. As you know, for example, phosphorus, you have a lot of phosphorus in the soil. What is important is not the quantity, is the availability. So if you have a crop that can get the phosphorus out of unavailable spaces, and then you have it in the crop, then you can make a fertilizer out of it and bring the phosphorus to the other crops. So this is the idea of using other crops than legume as green manure. So as I said before, today we'll talk about 4 types of green manure: grain legumes, legumes as green manure, grasses as green manure, and leguminous trees as green manure. So all these possibilities to produce biomass, to produce nitrogen and nutrients. But of course, if you have then your nitrogen and your nutrients in the crop, in the green manure, you don't have it in the crop. So the big question is, how can you bring these nutrients then to the crop that you want to fertilize? And for this, there's 5 ways to bring the nutrients from the green manure crop to the soil, and then, of course, to the crop you want to fertilize. The first that you have is the root decomposition. So when you will harvest the green manure, you will probably not harvest the roots that will decompose in the soil, and then the nutrients that the plant fixed, for example, nitrogen or mobilized, phosphorus or others, will be released in the soil, and you can plant the next crop and it will be able to get these nutrients. So this is the first pass. Then you could compost it. You could harvest the plant and compost it with manure or with kitchen waste or alone, and then you will produce a compost. So you will produce an organic fertilizer that you can then apply on the soil for the next crop you want to fertilize. Third of all, you can mulch. So you can just cut it, leave it on the ground, plant the next crop, or cut it, move it to another crop, and mulch the soil there. So this is quite easy, but you will bring something undecomposited of leafy parts, especially if it's cereal. You will bring something with a high CN ratio. You will bring a lot of carbon. So it is interesting. You will improve moisture. You will improve refuges for beneficiaries, insects, and of course you will bring carbon to the soil and maintain its fertility, but you might also provoke nitrogen starvation, so you should not do this on a crop that needs a lot of nitrogen. But it's still a way that you can bring the nutrients to the soil. First of all, you can harvest the crop and feed it to the animals. Usually, green manure are good fodder. Usually they are legumes and grasses, so they can be really well fed to animals. So you could just feed it to the animals, and the animal, of course, will produce manure, and then you will have the nutrients back to the soil for the crops you want to fertilize. And fifth, you could eat it, and then, of course, as I said before, if you collect your urine, you will get back these nutrients and you will be able to bring it to your crop that you want to fertilize. So these are the 5 possible ways to move the nutrients of a green manure to the crop that you want to fertilize. So as I said before, there's 4 type of green manure that we'll talk about today. First, you have the grain legumes. These are just actually crops that are legumes. They will produce grain that you can eat or sell, and so they are not technically green manure, but they will still contribute to fertilize your soil. Because first of all, you will not need to add nitrogen to these crops. They will be autonomous they will fix nitrogen with rhizobia, and you will not need to fertilize. And for the next crop, to the root decomposition, and if you use and leave the stems as mulch or compost them or feed them to the animals, you will get some nutrients in your system. So it's still a way to fertilize your crop and at the same time produce something to eat or to sell, but it's not as efficient for fertilization as a green manure that you use solely for fertilization. Um, then, of course, as I said, you can plant a crop really just to fertilize the soil, a crop that you will not eat or not sell. And then you will just include it in the rotation. So in your rotation, after a few crops that you sell, you will put a green manure to regenerate your soil and produce something that you can make a fertilizer out of it. If you use such legumes, so in this case we talk about legumes, they usually have a higher potential for soil enrichment. They can produce a lot more of biomass, so this means a lot more of carbon fixed, and often they also fix a lot more of nitrogen, so they can be really interesting to bring nitrogen, to bring organic matter, to mobilize nutrients, and have all of these nutrients than in a fertilizer. And the big difference is you don't export the nutrients because you don't eat it or you don't sell it. So you have them in your system. Then you can do what you want with them, feed them, mulch them, compost them. But in any of these cases, you will get them back to the soil. So it's really an interesting input of nitrogen or organic matter in the system. These are a few examples that you can use. For example, Stylosanthes, the perennial legume that can grow in dry areas. It's interesting because it stays green in the dry season and can be used as green fodder in the dry season. It fixes a lot of nitrogen. It can mobilize different nutrients, but it takes time to establish. Another example is Mucuna. It can produce a lot of biomass. It's really a rapid growth. And you can feed it, but not to animal, only to ruminants, otherwise it's toxic. You can use Cajun pea or pigeon pea. It's a bushy perennial legume. It grows really well in any type of soil. It creates bush quite rapidly and produces a lot of biomass. It can also produce grain that you can eat or feed to animals. But since it does this big bush, it's not really suited to mixture or grazing. You can use desmodium, which is, as we see in the push-pull, also in the crop association part, it can be interesting to control pests in cereals. It's also an excellent fodder that can be used for ruminants. Okay, then you can also use grasses as green manure. You do not need to use only legumes that fix nitrogen. If you use grasses, of course, they will not fix nitrogen, with the exception of eleusine that we'll talk about. But first of all, they will restructure the soil. Then they will create a high biomass production, a lot more than legumes. So you will have a lot of organic matter produced that you can have in your system and bring back to the soil to maintain its fertility. And finally, they can mobilize nutrients, phosphorus, and other trace elements from the soil. So as we discussed, most of the nutrients in the soil are here but are not available. So these grasses can help you to mobilize these nutrients and then use them to create a fertilizer. So a few example, Penicetum that we saw also for the push-pull system. It's a perennial grass that produces a high biomass and excellent fodder. It suppresses weed. It has a powerful and deep root system, so it's really interesting to recycle nutrients, to mobilize nutrients for deeper layer. It mobilizes a lot of phosphorus. It can decompact and restructure the soil. So it's really a really interesting green manure, but it's difficult to eradicate. Bracharia is basically the dry version of Penicillium, so it's adapted to dry region, but it have a lot of similarities, including the pest control in the push-pull system. Then you have eleusine as an example. I just give this example because it's a grass that fixes nitrogen, so it's quite interesting. Um, it's also good fodder. You could eat the seeds. In some countries they do that. It's good to. It has a strong and deep root system. It decompacts. So like most of these fodder grasses. Okay, and then in the green manure, of course, you don't have to sow a monoculture. You can mix the crops, and it's really interesting to mix different crops of legumes and grasses. First of all, you will reduce the risk of disease or pests because you have a lot more diversity, discontinuity of resource. If one green manure crop is killed by a pest, you will have all the other ones, so it's really interesting to mix them. It will increase the nutritional quality of the fodder if you want to use green manure as fodder, and you will optimize soil restructuration and regeneration by combining nitrogen fixation, phosphorus mobilization, soil decompaction of the different crops. If you want to produce forage, it's really essential to have this legume grass mixture in order to provide the proteins to the legume and to provide the fibers and the carbohydrates to the grasses. Last but not least, you can use leguminous tree as green manure. This means you can plant them as hedges around the plots. You can use Gliricidias, Espana, Calandra, Leucena, Cargenpi, Acacia, all leguminous tree you can just plant on hedges. It will help you also to limit erosion. It will recycle nutrients and water from deeper layer of the soil. It will protect from the climate, from pests, and you can use it as fodder trees or just as mulching. And you will really have a transfer of nitrogen, an input of nitrogen in your system. So thanks a lot for your attention and see you next week. Goodbye.